Along with centering the sacredness of the cycle of nature and our planet, one facet of the belief system of some pagans is a connection to the pre-Christian beliefs of various cultures. Some of that connection is simply a fascination with history, with the way that different people have been in relationship with each other and with the divine throughout the years. However, sometimes the motivation for this form of religious study is flat out mystical. What do you do if you have a transcendental experience about a deity that is not part of any of the contemporary religious structures you know of? The answer for most of us is to hit the books. My own fascination is with the beliefs and cultures of pre-Christian Scandinavia. I don't have a logical reason for this connection. I took one of those genetic tests, and my bloodline is almost entirely Scottish. But here I remain, poring over the books, research papers, and archaeological finds relating to Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Iceland, and other parts of Germanic Europe. I teach classes and lead ceremonies based on what we know of this part of the world, a form of paganism sometimes called revivalism. I describe myself as a heathen, a type of pagan inspired and informed by ancient Scandinavian beliefs and cultures. And one of the things in my research that struck me as so different from the culture that I live in is the pre-Christian Scandinavian view of what makes a good leader. Generosity is one of the main traits described in the written sources. A leader was viewed as effective if everyone they governed were thriving. From the quality of the harvest, to the health of the farmers and tradesfolk, to the survival rates of children, to the success of raiding and trading expeditions, when an entire settlement flourished, the leadership was considered good. Good leaders are routinely described as giving gifts to their people in many forms, lavish feasts and celebrations, livestock, gold arm rings and other jewelry, casks of ale and mead and more, and the celebration of Yule, arguably the biggest holiday in the pre-Christian Scandinavian world, was essentially a multi-day feast offered by the ruler in a settlement that ran until all the ale, which had been specially brewed for the occasion, had run out. It sounds fun, honest, yeah. It's fascinating to look at that culture from the perspective of the one I was raised in. Here in the United States, the widespread view of a successful person is that it's measured by the amount of wealth they've managed to accumulate. The pre-Christian Scandinavians didn't really have a concept of sin, but hoarding wealth might come close. It appears that my ancient kin of faith had very mixed feelings about wealth. It was desired, but also viewed as dangerous, and best managed by sharing abundance with others. The culture of the time was rooted in this generosity. The gifting of resources was literally how those in power maintained their position. In her book, Long Branches, Ruins of the Younger Futhark, scholar Anne Groa Sheffield writes, "Wealth was hard to win and easy to lose. It represented power and honor, yet to maintain power and honor, it had to be given away. It was of enormous value, as important as one's own kin, yet it was also to be disdained. Skalds routinely praised the generosity of princes by calling them ring breaker, enemy of gold, and similar kennings. And a kenning is a way of referring to a person, place, thing, or idea without using the proper name. Kennings are used in skaldic poetry, some of the surviving written sources that allow us to see some of how this part of the ancient world worked. The kennings for wealth and money, like those for good leaders, are very telling. Money and wealth were called strife of kinsmen, warrior's dispute, and path of the serpent. The image of a dragon, a giant serpent curled up on a pile of gold, comes to us from these sources. The link between the two dragons and giant piles of wealth only appear in Germanic stories and myths. That's where that archetype comes from, and it remains with us to this day. This philosophy of generosity, the sharing of resources, impacted every layer of society in the ancient Scandinavian world. Hospitality was another way that generosity manifested. The words host and guest originate from a single Proto-Indo-European word, gosti. It roughly translates to someone with whom one has reciprocal duties of hospitality. And hospitality was not simply social niceties. It was providing food and shelter when a storm brought an unexpected traveler to your door. Remember that at this point in history in northern latitudes, becoming stranded in a winter storm could mean death. Hospitality also meant pitching in to help with the harvest, to put out a fire, or to share food during a famine. Hospitality was a way of life, and contemporary heathen practice describes this hospitality as the gifting cycle. It is the idea that a gift of shelter, help, food, or anything else should be met with an equivalent gift. It is this cycle, this gifting back and forth between two people or groups that forms very strong bonds. It's also important to understand that gifting was and remains matched with ability and resources. This form of generosity is not about money. At its core, it's about help, and about helping in the way that we can. The United States is a culture with Germanic roots in language and customs. If we look to history, the very existence of billionaires is evidence of a large-scale moral and ethical failing in our culture. And that's a hard truth to live with. But we also know for a fact that we haven't always been like this. There is such strong historical precedent for shifting our ideas about what success means, about what good leadership looks like, and what it is to be a contributing member of a community. We can embrace the good parts of our Germanic cultural heritage by striving to be generous and hospitable. We can begin to shift our mindset about how we assess virtue. We can build a good gifting cycle. And we can manage the strife of kinsmen by allowing abundance to flow through us rather than piling it into a dragon's hoard.
This sermon is part 7 in a 9-part series. We're almost to the end of living our UU values and covenant, which is found in full on the back of your order of service. Each sermon in this series stands on its own, but if you want to catch up on any earlier installments, they're online in our sermon archive. And we'll continue to revisit this topic 2 more times, once a month, this congregational year, as part of exploring these new UU values and covenant that were adopted at last year's UU General Assembly, often abbreviated as GA. As your monthly reminder, where is GA this summer? Baltimore, that's right. So this summer, GA is being held in nearby Baltimore, Wednesday through Sunday, June 18th through the 22nd. Who's planning to go, even just for a day? Okay, quite a few of you. Email me if you are planning to go, because we'll create kind of a special list to keep everybody in touch that's going. Especially if you've never been to GA before, even if you could drive over for just a few hours, it's really worth it, especially if you could make one of the big events that day. It's fascinating to be in a room with 5,000 other UUs. That alone is really interesting. But also just spending an hour or so wandering around the exhibition hall is like a crash course in worldwide and national Unitarian Universalism. So it's if you can get over more information at uua.org/GA. Also, the cost to attend is going up at the end of March. So if you are thinking about going, probably register sooner rather than later. There are also various discounts and scholarships available. So again, go to uua.org/GA for more information about that. I should also share that in the months leading up to GA, the official GA chalice that's been used for years at General Assembly, it travels around to UU congregations in the geographic area, kind of like the Olympic torch, as we lead up to GA. And on Sunday, April 6th, the next entry in this sermon series, the GA chalice will be here at UUCF. There are about 40 congregations. We have a lot of UU congregations here. There are about 40 congregations within an hour drive of Baltimore, but only 13 Sundays when the Olympic torch chalice will be passing around. So I'm honored we were chosen as one of the 13 to be host congregations. So turning to today's focus on the UU value of generosity, it says, quote, "We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We covenant to freely and compassionately share, our faith, presence, and resources. And that our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. Let's briefly go into each of those sentences in turn. First, we cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. How is that connected to generosity? As one of my mentors used to say, practice doesn't actually make perfect. Practice just makes more perfect. I mean, permanent. It makes more so whatever, like Nick would tell you as a piano teacher, if you practice playing a piece the wrong way, you're not making it perfect. You're just making more permanent, whichever way you're practicing it. So the more we practice generosity, likewise, the more generous we become. We inculcate it. The more it becomes second nature to be generous, the more we practice generosity. And both gratitude and hope do tend to result. Gratitude for the opportunity to invest our money or our time into building that better world we dream about, and hope because you're taking active steps in doing that, in turning our dreams into deeds. Second, we covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, our presence, and our resources. Taking those final three words in turn, I suspect some of you really resonate with that word, faith. Others of you don't really think about it one way or the other. And still others are like, just bristle a little bit at that kind of traditional language of reverence. You're like, faith? I don't know. So faith has really gotten a bad reputation from people who were forced at various points in their life. I can identify with this, who were forced to sort of turn off your brain at the door of a church in order to believe 20 impossible things before breakfast. But traditionally, faith really just means having trust or confidence in something. Having faith in Unitarian Universalism, having faith in UUCF or anything else just means I have trust in this. I have confidence in this. In the same way you used to hear people say, I have trust in the full faith and credit of the United States. That's a sermon for another day. So, as a point of comparison, it's not just conservative Christians who talk about having faith in something. If you hang around long enough in Buddhist circles, you will hear people talking about needing to have faith in the three jewels of Buddhism if you're going to take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, in the Sangha. You have to have faith in those things. In Buddhism, faith, or saddha in Pali, the ancient tongue that the Buddha spoke, is also one of the 5 spiritual faculties that you need to cultivate in your meditation practices to overcome the 5 hindrances. The 5 hindrances are the things that hold you back, that hinder you from making progress, and the 5 faculties help you overcome them. I'm going to restrain myself. I could give a very long Dharma talk on the 5 hindrances and the 5 spiritual faculties. I will not do that. So I'm just going to stick to that first line. But I knew some of you would be like, well, what are they? So here they are, if you're curious. I don't want to hold that information back from you. Here's the thing, just focusing on that first line. If you are filled with doubt on your doubt, it will be a hindrance to your meditation practice. Like, you're never going to make progress in meditation if you spend your entire time on your meditation cushion wondering, is this working? Will this work? Is this a good use of my time? It's not that the Buddha is saying turn your brain off in regard to Buddhism, but just the time to do that is like later, not when you're doing the meditation practice. And there's so much again to say about that, but that so much progress can be made in meditation if you will relax your body and relax your expectations. Just open. Stop clinging to, I want something to happen. Nothing's going to happen as long as you want something to happen. You have to relax your body, relax your expectations, and just do the practice. Anyway, a lot to say about that. But you need that spiritual faculty of faith, of trust or confidence in the practice that it will work if you give it a chance. That's the kind of faith we're talking about. Trust or confidence that there's something in Unitarian Universalism that is good for you, that is good for the world, that there's trust or confidence in UUCF, in meditation or paganism or anything else that it's worthy of your time, your talent, your resources. And if we do have that kind of faith, we should be generous with our presence, showing up whenever we can, and our resources, which is, again, about much more than money alone. It's about money, but it's also about being generous with your attention, being generous with what you know, being generous with networking, connecting people that you know need to meet each other, generosity with hospitality, as Irene was talking about, generosity with your creativity, creating beauty in the world, and so much more. Third, our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. Many people think that the goal of growing up is to move from the dependence of childhood, my 21-month-old who, would need someone to make sure he doesn't fall down the steps and to eat and clean and all those things. The goal of growing up is to move from the dependence of childhood to the independence of adulthood. And I want that for him and for me. But if we stop there, that's actually arrested development in a way that a lot of people don't realize. True maturity is actually found in freely chosen interdependence. Realizing that we are deeply part of what we use tend to call the interdependent web of all existence. You'll see that one other of our values is interdependence. As Dr. King often said, we are tied together in a single garment of destiny. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, right? That word was very intentionally chosen. And whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. You shake one part of the web, it shakes all parts. I can never be what I ought, King said, until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. And that's the piece that so many of those billionaires miss, right? They miss that they're actually not what they need to be until everyone is what they need to be. That worldview is deeply grounded in the Ubuntu philosophy of Southern Africa of I am because we are. A conviction that a person is only truly a person through relationship with other people. Before concluding, there's just one other angle that as a meditation teacher, I would feel remiss if I didn't mention. When I think about generosity, one of my first associations is to what Buddhists call the three poisons and the three antidotes. If you didn't already know, Buddhists love lists. There's so many lists in Buddhism. We don't have time to get into that. But the current powers that be in this country are poisoning us with this torrential onslaught of greed, of hatred, of delusion, that State of the Union, I know it wasn't really a State of the Union address, don't email me, that was just filled with delusion. But the Buddhist tradition warns us against the temptation of retaliating with more of the same. As Dr. King said, returning poison for poison would only add deeper darkness to a night that is already devoid of stars. Instead, the Buddhist tradition urges us to practice the three antidotes. One of those kind of experiments you can use of what's really important to you is to spend some time thinking about if you could fund, a billboard that would go up across the country that said just one thing, what would you put on that billboard? One of the things I would consider is something like, the cure is generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. That is the cure. The only true cure for greed is generosity, co-creating a world in which everyone's basic needs are met, in which there is a stable floor for all, beneath which no one can sink, before we let anyone become a billionaire. As Gandhi said, there's enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. The only cure for hatred is loving kindness, or as we UUs tend to simply put it, love. You'll hear more about that one next Sunday from our youth group, and you'll hear more from me about love at the center of our UU values on that first Sunday in April. And the only cure for delusion is wisdom, which is so much of what we seek here at UUCF week after week, to draw wisdom from all the world's religions, balanced to the insights of modern science. And I'm grateful to be on that journey with all of you. If you're interested in diving deeper into our UU value of generosity, I recommend the book Infectious Generosity. It's by Chris Anderson. Who's ever watched a TED Talk? So Chris has been running the TED organization that runs TED Talks for more than 20 years. And I think TED Talks are really all about generously spreading great ideas, for co-creating a better world. I'll close with just a few words from his book. He writes, "Every human has the potential to give, to be generous. The urge to do this is built deep inside of us. It is those people who emphasize only the Tennyson poem, Nature Red in Tooth and Claw, the people that only emphasize that part of evolution, we have also evolved to cooperate, to be generous with each other. That's deeply a part of who we've evolved to be. Part of that's to be generous within your tribe, but that's what we're also all about, widening our circle of concern, those with whom we agree with. So that's deeply a part of us. When we share our time, our money, our creativity, those acts can spark responses in kind. So once it gets started, generosity can be infectious in a good way. It can spread like wildfire. And as it passes from one person to the next, many lives can be touched. And our collective witnessing of what humans are capable of can overcome today's prevailing cynicism, bringing people together in common cause. We were born to be connected, so give in any way that you feel able. Give creatively, give courageously, give collaboratively, and let the magic of generosity ripple out into the universe. See what happens. And if you do experiment with that kind of infectious generosity, you might just find yourself living into that spirit of gratitude, that spirit of hope promised by our UU value of generosity. In that spirit, as we seek to discern the ways that we individually and collectively are called to live out our UU value of generosity for such a time as this, please rise and body your spirit as we sing together hymn 1028 in your teal hymnal, Fire of Commitment.